Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your response. That lets me know that you are able to see me. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, we are.
Awesome, fantastic. Who is that friendly voice?
It's Colleen.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Karen. Love that.
I'm so excited for this presentation. I've been waiting.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Okay, so without any further delay, so let's go ahead and begin. So I'd like to say, first of all, I'm very happy to be here today, and I really do truly appreciate each of you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be a part of this workshop today. So thank you so much for taking interest in this and for being a part of the workshop today. And I also want to express a word of gratitude to the Haitian Creole Literacy Institute Conference, and specifically to Nadalia Charles, who extended the invitation to me to conduct this workshop, on their behalf. So I really, really appreciate that, and thankful for the work that the Palm Beach County School District is doing in collaboration with the Haitian Creole Literacy Institute. So once again, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to be here. And I'm really looking forward to our time today. And all of the mics have been muted, but the mics will be unmuted once the workshop has been presented. And I really look forward to the Q&A section, of the workshop. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and begin. I'd like to begin by way of sort of really orienting myself, and also to share with you a little bit about, these individuals that you see on your screen. Many of you are familiar with these folks. These individuals, for me, are my spiritual mentors. They are people whose life and work has impresses me, and whose contribution to society, at large, and to Black people in particular, leaves encourages me and inspires me. And so I really do appreciate the role that each of them play, in my thinking and in the work that I try to do. And certainly for those of you of Haitian descent, certainly you recognize the image of Jean-Jacques Dessalines. And I love what he represents for me in my life. And I often kid with close friends that that very often, when I think about who I most align with, Toussaint on the one hand and Dessalines on the other hand, my spirit gravitates towards Dessalines. Likewise, if we were to make a similar comparison with respect to African-American civil rights leaders, the same comparison would be made with respect to Malcolm and Martin. And pretty much for me, all day, every day, pretty much, it's the Malcolm side of me that I need to try to contain. And certainly James Baldwin is someone that I respect a great deal. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the work of Raoul Peck. Raoul is a Haitian filmmaker, and one of his recent works, documentary, was about the life of James Baldwin. I so appreciate what Mr. Peck had to say about Baldwin. And what he said effectively is that Baldwin is not someone that you read, but in fact, Baldwin is someone that you study. And I certainly find that in my reflection and my experience with respect to Baldwin. And Mother Maya, I say that out of deep respect and reverence. This is not, an ego thing, but her work and her energy and her spirit is one that I really resonate with. And And it's an interesting coincidence as well that her son and I share the same first name. Obviously, the pronunciation is different, but it's the same name nonetheless. So these are some of the folks who, in some respects, sort of keeps me anchored in my own personal space of reflection. So let's take a look at what our objectives are for today. You know, our time is brief, so I'm trying to put in as much as possible. So you may find at times that I move a little bit faster than I care to, but I want to be mindful of the time that the Haitian Creole Literacy Institute, you know, has expressed. So one of the objectives, you know, is to recognize the importance of culture as it relates to social and emotional development. Another objective is to identify the relationship between culture and intelligence. That one is really, really critical. And a third objective is to demonstrate the effects of cultural beliefs on academic achievement. Another really critical, you know, matter here for us to consider. And fourthly, to learn the cultural factors that shape identity of Haitian and Haitian-American students. And fifthly, it's important to understand the collective narrative of souffrance haïtienne and to understand the violence that many of our people experience with respect to deportation. And I do consider deportation a form of violence, particularly when you take into consideration that children are often involved and affected by family members, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, grandparents who are deported, and children are left to traumatized to sort of fend on their own. And lastly, the last objective is really to inquire some resources, indigenous Haitian wisdom and resiliency. And what I've done in our presentation, as you will notice in a little bit, is that I have sort of peppered throughout the workshop, you know, what I consider to be, you know, key nuggets of Haitian wisdom and Haitian resilience that we can incorporate in the work that we do, whether it's that of a teacher, or whether it is that of a clinician, or whether it is that of a school administrator, principal, assistant principal, and it is certainly useful and applicable for students as well. In fact, it's probably even more critical for students than anyone else. So I'd like to discuss very, very briefly my theoretical framework, the hypothesis within which I have framed this workshop here today. So the pedagogical framework essentially states that the Black child is a unique being. The Black child is a unique being, unique from a historical perspective, and also unique from a developmental perspective as well. Unique historically, developmentally speaking, this is a one of a kind human being, that is the Black child. Similarly, I propose that the Black child of Haitian ancestry is a particular and a peculiar child. Particular in the sense that the Haitian child has been shaped, formed by a particular history that stands apart from that of many other children. And that history continues to impact, influence, the Haitian child presently. And I mentioned the fact that the Haitian, Black child, for those of you who are familiar with the second Haitian Constitution, that is the Constitution of 1805, specifically states that, anyone who lived, born in Haiti, is considered, a Haitian. And by definition, according to the Constitution, Haitian and Black are synonymous, given our unique historical context or the unique historical experience, the unique historical legacy of the Haitian, child. A third point from a point of reference is that culture, which I'll be speaking quite a lot about culture dictates academics. Culture dictates academics. And culture also determines social and emotional wellness. And we can extend that even further to include psychological as well as spiritual wellness, because in the human experience, those things are very often not only complementary, but often one and the same from an experiential perspective. At least from an experiential perspective, it may be difficult to sort of segment, where one begins and where one ends. Another point in terms of framework, a frame of reference, is that culture is necessary to consider culture as a force, as a dominating force. And that is, culture is dynamic, and that in the wrong hands, culture can be oppressive and lethal. So that's sort of the theoretical framework from which, we will begin our conversation here today. Now, all of you know that I am, by profession, a psychotherapist, and that's sort of the way that I think and move. And for those of you who know me well, understand that part of what I do very often expand or exceed that title of being a psychotherapist. And so what I'm going to ask you to do with me for a moment here, and this is the psychotherapist part of me, is that before I show you the next slide, I'm going to ask you to make sure that you're someplace that you're comfortable. If you need to prop your feet up, please do that. If you need to sort of just lean back, in a comfortable chair or on a couch, feel free to do that. I just invite you to relax a bit and to please allow your mind to rest. And if you're comfortable, you can feel free to close your eyes. So I did tell you that I'm a therapist. And so I'm just going to invite you to please listen as I read, these words. The first child, first to see a sunshine, first to see a moonlit night, first to see a starry sky, first to hear a bird sing, first to smell a flower, first to laugh, first to sing, first to run in a grassy field, first to feel the sensation of raindrops, first to sit under a shade tree. First to taste a fruit. First to feel a cool summer breeze. First to see animals at play. First to draw art. First to learn a language. First to count. First to go through the stages of development. First to be a part of a society. First to enjoy the love of a mother. First to enjoy the protection of a father. First to have a brother and a sister. First to learn to share. First to behold the beauty of nature. First to see the harmony in nature. First to be in awe of the mystery of nature. First to recognize the vastness of the universe. First to revere the divine. First to recognize the divine in all. First to see himself and herself in the divine. First to see a reflection of the divine in himself or herself. This is who you are, the first Black child. It is, important for me to also state that it is impossible. You cannot know the Black child, through the study of Europeans, nor through the psychology of the European child. Cannot do that, because the first child is unique. The evolutionary history of humanity, we know for certain, empirically, factually, the evolutionary history of humanity comes through the African man and the African woman. That history is contained in the mind and the body of the Black child. So therefore, Black children's educational needs are fundamentally different. Their innate genius must be allowed to grow and develop in the proper context based on their unique history. I'm going to share with you throughout our workshop, the presentation, Haitian proverbs that I think that are relevant to our subject. And this particular proverb states, "Pas jamais j'étais vieux chaudier pour neuf. Pas jamais j'étais vieux chaudier pour neuf." Translated means, never discard an old pot for a new one. In other words, it means don't abandon old friends when you make new ones. And I would extend that with respect to the Black child, and that is, we should not minimize her and become enamored with children who are more recent in the historical stage. So Black children hold a unique place. They contain and have a unique history, a unique psychology, a unique developmental process. Yes, a unique developmental process. The first child, as I said, the first child is first, the original child of planet Earth. Let's just think about that for a moment. Let's just think about that for a moment. If you are an educator, if you are a teacher, if you are a parent, if you operate a daycare wherein you have Black children, think about what that one fact would mean and could do for the psyche of a Black child. When we situate him, when we situate her within the context of her proper historical, biological context, position. One of the things that, and I'm sure many of you, if you are parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers, one of the things that I find to be the most disheartening to me, I've seen it up close in my own family, and I've seen it with children whose family that I provide counseling for. And that is when you see a Black child who is full of energy, full of excitement, full of enthusiasm, full of hopes and aspirations. And then you observe a very sad, bizarre, and a peculiar state that this child that was once so full of vigor and vibrancy and energy and motivation, that once they step foot into the formal educational process, that educational experience, nothing is sadder to me than to see that light that was once so clear in their eyes begin to dim. It's as if they know that something is occurring in them and around them, but they don't have the language to articulate what is going on and what is happening to them when they are taken out of the environment where they are most free to be themselves in their homes, and then placed into a foreign environment where they are expected to be everything and anything except who they truly are. So what then does it mean to be the first child? Black children's educational needs, are different. And I think fundamentally what this means is that the innate genius of Black children must be allowed to grow and to develop in the proper context based on their own unique history. That is the critical issue here. That is the critical issue here. There's another Haitian proverb that I think speaks to very well to our conversation here today. And it goes like this: wash nan d'lo, pa kon doule wash nan soleil. In other words, translated, it means stones in the water don't know the pain of the stones in the sun. meaning that those with an easy life don't know or don't care to know about the suffering, of others. And it is a fact that Black children, as many of you know and will attest, are often treated like anything but children. They're often perceived, viewed, and treated as being older than what their ages truly are. And so that means that even with people who should be able to know and recognize that they're dealing with children and sometimes very young children, our very young children are often perceived and treated as children much older than themselves. And certainly that has a tremendous impact on the psychological and the emotional well-being of our children because of the disparate treatment that they sometimes, experience at school and other similar institutions. So, continuing further with respect to, to the Haitian child more specifically, the Haitian child more specifically is one that has its own, challenges. And before I address the challenges, I'd like to first of all address, the resources. I'd like to address the things that these children possess that can be a source and a tool for their resiliency. And in order for them to be able to use these resources as resiliency, as a tool for resiliency, it is necessary that the adults in their lives are conscious and are able to play that role. One of the things, first of all, is the fact that Haitian children have a rich and a distinguished, heritage. Rich from the standpoint that their ancestors were from no less than 100 different cultures or ethnic groups from West and Central Africa, but somehow their own resiliency enabled them, these are ancestors from the West and Central coast of Africa, from over different groups, were somehow able to coalesce and to create a sense of cohesiveness to form a people, to organize themselves, to form resistance, organize themselves in such a way to not demand their freedom, but had the wherewithal and the proper mind and the spirit to seize their freedom. That's who the Haitian child is. That's her legacy. That's his legacy. And they've also been given the legacy of land. And one of the struggles and one of the tension that I found growing up here in the United States, one of the advantages that I felt that I had growing up is the fact that despite all of the discrimination with respect to ethnicity, of being Haitian, but one of the things that for me was a constant that enabled me to have an anchor to my roots is the fact that there was a piece of land out there that we as Haitians could claim for ourselves. And that, and I cannot emphasize enough the significance of that from a psychological, emotional perspective in terms of creating a shield against discrimination. Another thing that I think sometimes we perhaps don't appreciate enough is the fact that over 100 different ethnic groups from West and Central Africa finding themselves in Haiti, they had the genius in the horrors of enslavement and oppression, rape, torture, murder. They had the ability to create a unique and a distinct language, not a pretend language mimicking French, Spanish, Portuguese, but our ancestors, their ancestors created Creole, their own language. And whether you speak it well or not, or whether you speak it at all, or whether you butcher it, it's your heritage waiting for you to become acquainted or reacquainted with it. And certainly another aspect of our legacy is our freedom. And freedom not only for us, but our ancestors were dedicated and devoted to the freedom of every nation on this earth that they could lend a hand in helping them to acquire freedom. And we also have a distinct culture, one that anchors us, one that defines who we are. And we also have a distinct belief system. Now, regardless of where you fall in the spectrum of what your own personal belief systems happen to be, what we know that is important with respect to identity is that religion and culture and identity are often interdependent, because it's difficult to speak to a person from Japan without them asserting their background of Shintoism. Whether they practice it or not, neither here nor there. But that's a part of their heritage. Someone from Israel, whether they are a practicing Jew or not, that is a part of their identity. And similarly, for us as Haitians, wherever you happen to fall in terms of actual faith practice, that's a matter of choice for sure. But it's so important to be able to appreciate and to show respect and reverence for our ancestors. Because without our ancestors being who they were and who they are, we would not have freedom. We wouldn't have a land. We wouldn't have the culture. We wouldn't have the heritage. And so we have to take mind. We have to be careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as they often say. Now, with respect to some of the constraints or challenges that the Haitian child faces still today, is the fact that the very word Haiti or Haitian is used in a pejorative manner. And that is a burden for some. And many of you who have lived in South Florida for any period of time know of the consequences and the impact of that has had on children, in the school system. And part of that experience of discrimination contributes to part of what is a collective souffrance that we as Haitians, regardless of where we are on the planet, that there are very few places that you can go where someone won't have an opinion about who it is and what it is to be Haitian. And unfortunately, very often, it carries with it very negative connotations. And there's no way of escaping that. Education doesn't give you a pass. Social economic status doesn't. And so this is a manufactured issue, a manufactured problem. And the same holds true with respect to Haiti being, quote unquote, the poorest country in the Indies. That too is a manufactured issue, a manufactured situation. I'm not a politician, so I don't have no interest in getting involved in that kind of conversation. But I know that one of our participants here today, my good friend Zeke Matthias, artist that he is, and using his art as a form of social critique, has done a beautiful piece about this misnomer about Haiti being, quote unquote, a poor country. And also, deportation is a form of violence that affects, our children. When parents are deported and children are left to then fend for themselves and then expected to somehow function in the community, somehow expected to function in the classroom. And there is a fact, truth to the fact that that we are miseducated, and miseducated sometimes more so from the perspective of what gets omitted in the educational process. And as a consequence, our heritage is often, maligned. I'd like to look at another proverb here. Tibuik pakui pase maman. Tibuik pakui pase maman. Translating means the little donkey doesn't run faster than its mother. So, meaning that one is only as good as one roots. And so I take that by extension to mean that we are only as good as our ancestors. And by that, I mean that to the extent that we disconnect, ourselves from them, we do ourselves as well as them, a disservice. Now, culture, I think very often we think of culture, as as artifacts such as, artwork, sculptures, paintings, particular dress, food, and things, of that nature. Music, religion to some extent. Culture certainly is all of those things. It's all of those things. But it's also important to recognize the fact that culture, in some instances, equates to conquest. Culture, because when you take into consideration the fact that if a person was born in Cuba and they're of African descent, and that they are, and that they're speaking Spanish, well, I got news for you. What, they didn't volunteer to learn and speak Spanish. The countries on the continent in Africa who speaks French, Dutch, well, they didn't volunteer to speak those languages. Those languages were imposed. Those languages are evidence of the violence that occurred. And so, in essence, those languages are the visible, not memory, manifestation of that violence. And so culture as well can be viewed as a colonization, as a force as colonization, in terms of an imposition, of one culture above another. Because culture from that perspective equates to conquest. And by extension, culture is a form of indoctrination that can be, in many instances, have been imposed upon people. Now, let me just kind of step back here with you for a moment so that this is not feeling too esoteric and too theoretical. That it's important to appreciate the fact that in the educational system that we are all a part of, that cultural indoctrination happens. And that I know for myself, and this may apply to some of you, I know for myself, having completed an advanced degree, that some 15 years later, I am painstakingly in the process of trying to undo some of the cultural indoctrination that has come through my own education. And if you think about the impact that has, on children who don't have the wherewithal to distinguish what is their culture versus cultural imposition, that is truly not only a frightening situation, but it is a situation that we can connect the dots in terms of academic so-called underperformance of Black children, and which goes along with the school to prison pipeline. So a lot of these things are, quote unquote, rooted in culture, but then you have to ask yourself whose culture, is being propagated. And so these these situations, this presents some very, very unique challenges for us and for Black children, in particular, because they don't have the wherewithal to stand for themselves. Heck, most adults, I've been in the situation where I wasn't able or willing to speak for myself because of the social pressure, of being in a graduate program. Now, having said that, looking at culture as a form of domination, it is also the case, and this is very critical, it is also the case that culture is the means by which we can liberate ourselves. Culture properly understood and examined and executed is and can be a source of resistance, a source, a means of preserving, oneself from being completely dominated by the dominant culture, which often will not and does not take who you are culturally into consideration. And culture also is necessary to understand and to shape and to form identity. Because without the cultural awareness, without the cultural tools, without the cultural resources, then identity formation is going to be lacking. Is going to be lacking. And one of the things that is critical, and that is a part of our heritage as Haitians, is the fact that we've never mistaken knowledge, as a true form of intelligence. And by that, I mean, we make a distinction culturally from academic knowledge versus connaissance. Connaissance meaning the kind of knowledge, the kind of learning, the kind of wisdom that is experiential, that occurs within the community, within the collective of like-minded people who share the same culture. Connaissance only happens within the collective, within the community of Haitians, Haitian community, where there is room and space for the culture to come to life. So another proverb here for us to consider. Ou pa ka achete morceau maman nan marché. Ou pa ka achete morceau maman nan marché. You can't buy a piece of a mother in the market. In other words, mothers are irreplaceable. And by extension, I would say the same thing about culture. Culture, your own culture, is irreplaceable, because without your culture, you won't know who you are. You are completely at the mercy of another people to tell you who you are. And they will know that you're not one of them. So you're in a lose-lose proposition. So culture is our salvation, really. One of the things that I believe that happened and can happen to our children is what I refer to as cultural schizophrenia. And that still to this day, our children don't see or hear themselves enough in the narrative or in the process of education. And the environment, directly or indirectly, consciously or subconsciously, they are being fed messages that makes them think and that keeps them on the margins. And I think for a lot of our children that it's unfortunate, but it's understandable that some of them cannot withstand the persistent onslaught of this cultural schizophrenia that occurs. W.E.B. Du Bois years ago spoke about this situation. He spoke about this double consciousness that Black children, that Black people experience. That is an experience that is one where experientially is as though two different forces, two different identities are warring within the Black body because of the experiences that occurs in the larger society. And Ralph Ellison said the same thing very beautifully in his novel, The Invisible Man. And the role of culture in this respect, is profound. Because if you think about it, a very, very young child, a very, very young child, a very young Black child, if they're lucky enough to have the benefit of a good, loving, stable home where there is ample love, nurture, and security, and then they step into an educational system not designed for them. And as an aside, I don't want to miss this point. One of the things with respect to equipping Black children, certainly as I've indicated in terms of helping to ground them in their cultural heritage. Another thing that I think is critically important is that we be honest with them, because that more than anything else can be a way to save them from this sort of a cultural schizophrenia that I'm talking about right now. That is, it's important because it's important for our children to understand that things at school and the school system may not always work for them. And I'm not proposing that we say that to them to give them an excuse to underperform. No. On the contrary, it's a way of arming them with truthful, good information so that they can be grounded in reality, so that they can recognize and know where they are. Because the cultural milieu that they experience at home, when they get into the school system and go through the school doors, they are entering a completely different cultural landscape. One that in many instances are still hostile to that child, to those children. So in order to sort of keep them grounded, it's necessary to arm them with that information and then to let them know that, look, we love you, we have high expectations of you, we know you're capable, and we're going to do everything that we can to supplement your education, to make sure that you get the education that you need at the school that you attend. Because it's necessary, because otherwise you create a situation where some children are more robust than others, where a child can begin to experience tremendous mental health distress. I know, one of my grandnieces herself, I've not heard this term that before that she used with me. She called me one day and wanted to talk with me and say, Uncle Guy, I'm experiencing academic distress. I think she mentioned academic insecurity rather. So it's important to appreciate the fact that when our children leave home and they enter an education environment, and this is true even if you're sending your kid to college, or even if you're a full-blown adult and you're going to a educational a program of some sort, that you're mindful, of the difference, in those environments. And so, I would make one other point here, and that is a type of education that doesn't take into consideration a child's culture is tantamount to academic violence, because it contributes to keeping a child invisible and keeping them on the margins. So one other proverb here. Le maingwe model. Le maingwe model suneon upaka bal ku fo. In other words, when a mosquito bites you on your nose, you can't hit it very hard. In other words, deal with personal problems in a way not to cause yourself more trouble. So we know that there are obvious challenges, limitations in the schools that our children are a part of. So it's our responsibility and our obligation to do what we can to supplement their education. It's our responsibility and our duty to advocate within the school system so that our children are getting what they deserve and what they need, not just to pass tests and to move from one grade to the other, but so that they can be whole, healthy in mind, body, and spirit. I'm going to enter into our Q&A session now. And so give me a moment here while I unmute everyone. Okay, so I see the people asked to be unmuted, so give me a second here. Okay, I'm going to unmute Dr. Desir. Dr. Desir?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, please.
No, I was fascinated by the cultural schizophrenia concept and the way that you expressed it. And you talked about code switching and really trying to integrate the child's culture into the space. But, I think this is a responsibility of our community for our kids. And just as a clinician and someone having young people in your world, and what would you propose a treatment plan or a program would kind of look like or include?
I would say that 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 at a very minimum that certainly depending on the child's age, really, that the parents would have to play a very central role, because who the child is at home versus who the child is at school is information that the parent is going to know. And I think that would need to be considered, in coming up, with the plan. And, and teachers, would need to play, a role in that. And also, I believe that the child, really, to my mind, regardless of age, would need to be able to have an input about what their experience is. Now, how we go about doing that would be necessary to have some, some wisdom about that, because we have to keep in mind the fact that children live in a very big world, and by that I mean adults are big people, and so that can be very scary and frightening to a child, and so that the child's voice needs to be included, but it needs to be among people that the child feels safe with. That's what I would suggest, Dr. Desir, as a starting point. Um,
Thank you.
I see Miss Jemiah Clemens here. Okay. Jemiah, I think you unmuted.
Oh, I'm not really sure of my question yet. Just give me a minute.
Okay, no problem, no problem. Okay, let's see here. Fanya asked to be unmuted. Okay, Fanya?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you so much for this afternoon. This is really interesting. And being that I work within the school district, I was very taken by the statement from your niece that says that she's experiencing academic insecurity. And I personally had seen it in terms of anxiety, but I love the way that she expressed it. And I guess I'm trying to figure out, particularly as being part of the system and also being part of the community, and how can we go around to reduce that level of insecurity that these students may be experiencing? And how do we even bring it up to the families in terms of so that they can understand what the students are experiencing?
Wow. Dr. Fanya, that's a heavy one. That's a wow. It is definitely a very complicated, situation, and it is obviously a multi-generational issue, and and I think we have to continue to address this in the best ways possible. In some instances, depending on the situation, depending on the child, in some instances, in a different educational context may be best. I can only speak about my own family. My goddaughter, she and her husband, they did have their oldest, child, in school, but over a period of time, it became evident that that wasn't working, and so they decided to homeschool. And so sometimes that's an option. That's not always possible because of lots of different issues, lots of different reasons, for work. And so, I am, I appreciate the question, but I have to tell you that I don't know that there are, simple answers specifically in trying to make this happen, within the context of the public school system, as it exists, because the bureaucracy, I mean, there are good people in all of these organizations. There are good people, but the reality is that the bureaucracy of these systems, move and prod and push people, the best of us, to conform, to these institutions. And so, some people like yourself, Dr. Fania, who's very conscientious, I have no doubt that you do a Herculean task of trying to bring this about. But there are always, unfortunately, those constraints and those limits as far as what one person or group of people, is able to do within a, within a large organization that seem to outlive all of us. I'm sorry it can be of more help there.
Is it okay for me to piggyback off of what was said?
Of course.
So I'm not entirely sure who asked the question, but I am the niece. Hello, everyone. And basically, my phrase or term, academic insecurity, came from walking into classrooms and walking into spaces and seeing people who didn't look like me, especially not women, not Black women, not Haitian girls at all. So I felt very alone in that sense, and I felt a bit of imposter syndrome, I guess you could say. So as a solution, I would propose, as people who work in the system and in education, to just nurture and to encourage your Black students and your Haitian students as much as possible, because we're walking into these spaces where we're not necessarily welcome, we're condescended, and we don't have that support from people who look like us. So, yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Thank you so much for saying that and clarifying it even further. I think that's such a powerful framework for us to take along, if anything, for today, because for me, I've heard it predominantly from a lot of young Black males, because my school is predominantly Black males, and hearing it from the female perspective as well, there seemed to be this sense of imposter syndrome that keeps rearing its ugly head for our children in the educational system. And thank you so much for definitely putting that light on there for that for today.
Okay. I'm going to unmute Corinne. Corinne, you're unmuted. Can you?
Hello, everyone. So your niece is absolutely amazing. Can I adopt her too?
You can definitely share her. Appreciate the.
So my question definitely was, as a parent, as an auntie that is kind of co-parenting a younger Black child. My question really is, how do we supplement in that aspect? Definitely, I know I had a similar question as Dr. Fania, how to do that. So it really was helpful to find that out. How can we definitely create safe spaces of safety for our children? Yeah. But how do we supplement when you do have a child that you're already, they're in the school system for majority of the day, and then you come home? How do you encourage them and support them in that aspect from at home? Because you still want them to go to school, but you still have the difficulty of being able to supplement that.
Of course. I think organizations such as the Haitian Creole Literacy Institute and other like organization, for example, in Miami, the Little Haiti Cultural Arts Center, I think that one way of supplementing, and this is going on, and that is we need to expand and do more of that, so that our children have that place where they can be themselves and see themselves reflected and affirmed in these spaces where they can really breathe and exhale, and where they can know that something is not wrong with them, in what they are experiencing, but that they can find and begin to become a part of and to create community. And this is something that we all have a role to play, and to really, literally, and to contribute towards transforming educational systems in those of us in cities and states where we have schools that are centered on, that are centered culturally, around the well-being of the Black child, partnering with those organizations, partnering with those schools in terms of some of the things that they're doing that maintain the academic, social, emotional well-being, of their students. Because at the end of the day, we need a community of thriving, healthy children in order for us to be well. I'm going to unmute. Leonie, you're unmuted.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't have anything.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Lexi is typically quiet, so I just unmuted you, Lexi, just in case.
I just wanted to say thank you for having this discussion today. It was great.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, to participate. Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, I don't know that I'm missing anyone who asked to be unmuted. Let's see here. Lolette? Oh, okay.
Hello, Dr. Goy, how are you?
Yes, I'm good. I'm good, Lolette. Thank you for joining.
No problem. It's great to hear that you continuing to really, highlight the importance of our cultural heritage. I spent the last 21 years doing this kind of work because it's important for our children to understand, the legacy of our cultural heritage, and for me, the more we do it, and as you rightly said, it takes each one of us, it takes the village to actually educate our children. And how are we, continuing the conversations? How are we telling the stories? How are we talking about the importance of our proverbs? At home, at colleges, I work in universities as well, and I run workshops with the young people to get them to understand the importance of our proverbs. And regardless of our background, whether we Caribbean, whether we Africans, or wherever we come from, Proverbs is very much part of our cultural heritage and our identity. And it's important to preserve it, because I would not be who I am today if I didn't understand the power of our Proverbs. My grandmother always talks about these Proverbs. This is where our story comes from. This is where our experience comes from. This is how we express how we feel. This is how we talk about what's going on with us. This is how we share our stories. This is how we share our legacies. And, it's becoming a dying craft in terms of how we tell our stories and pass them on. So I think what you're doing is tremendous to really keep that heritage alive. Because, the lack of representation, if we don't see, if we don't hear, and we don't feel what is going on in terms of our culture and our heritage, if we don't see representation of ourselves, if we don't understand the importance of our proverbs, then the distinction will be lost. Thank you so much, Dr. Gay, for doing the work you do. I think it's honorable. And whether you are in the UK or whether you're in the US or whether you're in different parts of Africa, we have to come together collectively and to keep our stories alive.
Thank you so much, Lola. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Marie, Miss Marie. I'm going to unmute you if you had something to share. Okay. All right, I see Brother Zeke is in. I'm going to unmute you if you had something to share, Zeke.
Dr. Gee, as always, thank you for a great presentation. Some of the takeaways, when you look at the part that you talked about cultural indoctrination, that kind of like got me a little bit. And we refer to it, the cultural imposition and whose culture that is propagated. I mean, these are some great things that you, like you said, your niece was on the call listening to. It's important because that narrative of understanding who we are starts with workshops like this. And thank you for putting on a great workshop, and it's very informative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, it wouldn't have been possible without all of you participating here today. And so thank you for taking the time, and I really appreciate it. And certainly this is part of an ongoing conversation. And to the extent that I can be a listening ear and to lend my voice, I'm certainly open to continue to be part of this conversation. All right. Thank all of you so very much. And I really appreciate, your participation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.